still hear myself. I hate that. There we go. Okay. We'll give some of the stragglers a little bit of time just in case. I know I meant to do this literally an hour and a half ago, but yay for Comcast. Let's see. Super loud for me still. Okay. Alright, well, welcome to Swordsfall Cast. Not quite sure what I'm gonna call this yet. Lately I've just been working on the RPG parts, so I wanted to give like a quick second to show basically what I've been doing lately. I think I actually have a PDF, so I don't have to show you guys like the raw. What's up, World Anvil peeps? Ash and Dillian, how's it going? Alright, so, I don't know if people have seen like my little redesigned front page. I did this like a couple of weeks ago. I haven't done like a stream in 2-3 weeks. There was World, Ember was doing that a lot. And then lately it's just been working on the RPG part. I put up a poll for my patrons to ask them which one they preferred me to do, if they wanted more stories or if they wanted RPG. And overwhelmingly it was RPG. I was actually really surprised. I didn't think the RPG part would be that popular. I figured it would be, whatever. But it ended up being something that people really wanted. So, thank you. I wanted it to kind of be a little bit of a landing page. That way it was easier for people to figure out basically what was going on. Yeah, thank you. How does the mic sound? This is like the final evolution of the mic form, more or less. Why is it being... Thank you. Oh, Twitch thing is being weird today. Fine, Twitch overlay. Don't work. I didn't like you anyway. Alright. Show off with the Patreon page as usual. I'm really getting good at starting to do a lot of different updates. You can see I got polls up for my Patreon, which I always try to do. I always try to like get people's input on this kind of stuff because it's easy just to go in whatever direction I want to, but I'd rather it be something that people really feel like they can be a part of, they can get into. No worries. So if you're a Patreon and you have not done this yet, please do this, especially this one, just because I really wanted to know more about like where people's opinions are and stuff, because I feel like games just kind of assume that people like one or the other. They don't really ever take the time to be like, hey, do people really enjoy a dungeon crawl, or are people looking more for intrigue or conspiracy? You know, like there's a lot of different ways to do it, and D&D has always done it one way. They've always done the heroic journey, and I don't always want to assume that that is actually what people want. I like to give them that sense that, oh, maybe if there's some other form that hasn't really gotten some love, you know, then I have the ability to do that right now since I don't really have a deadline, I guess. I mean, I have a deadline for myself personally. I want to get the alpha test out by March, and we're getting pretty close to that. Which, let me see if I still have the... Keep in mind it's a prototype, so it's not going to be the sexiest, but get this going. I was more prepared, and then hashtag Comcast issues happened, and now I kind of feel behind. we're gonna keep it kind of short today versus like normal. And one of these days I will actually learn how to use this thing quickly. That's a lie. Booyaka. Yeah, we'll just put that right there. So anyway, I've just been kind of working a little bit on making the layout work a little bit. This isn't like the final version of it or anything like that, but I just kind of wanted to give like a little look at kind of where I'm going with this. The background and all that stuff I'll work on more. But it's literally just, if anybody's ever played Genesis, then the system should be pretty familiar. Basically, I'm doing a spin-off of Genesis, of narrative dice. I'm a big fan of using narrative in games a lot. I'm usually that guy who, even in a D&D game, I'm always like, well, what if I hop on the dragon's back and cover its face? And then, like, you can't really do that without doing this thing, and then if you do this save, and it always just feels discouraging. Not that I dislike D&D, don't get me wrong. I've had plenty of fun in it, but there's other ways to do it, and I would like to. And Genesis itself is a really cool system, and really the big downside was that it didn't really have anything that you could just take to the table. You had to make a campaign as usual, but then you would have to make the world, you'd have to make the NPCs, you'd have to make the monsters, you'd have to make the items. The magic by default is kind of OP because there's no real rails on it. So it was a really good dice system that just, I feel like not a lot of people played because it just didn't have content to it. And they had Runes of Tyranthia that came out, and that one, it's interesting. It's just one of those things where I think there's room to do things more creatively and different, and I'm always looking forward to seeing people do it. And when they don't do it, then I'm like, cool, I guess I'll do it. Hey, V-Ferg. I should have probably sent out a tweet and let people know that I was actually finally up and streaming for once. Has anybody played like a narrative dice system? Like if they played the FFG versions of Star Wars? Those did that a lot. There's also, I guess, kind of Blades in the Dark is similar. It's just instead of using like custom dice, they basically pulled it apart and put it across a grid, which works really well. For me, I'm kind of splitting it down the middle. I like what you can do with custom dice, but I'm not going to make people buy custom dice because that's always the issue. So I actually have it to where it will show you. So basically what I did is I just made it easy and basically broke it down and showed you like across the overall dice what it looks like. We'll just make this the whole damn thing. We're not going to talk about that stuff in the background. Need you to calm down, sir. There we go. It's fun. It's just that it really requires the GM to do a lot of work. So if you're either in a situation where you don't have the time to really put into a really detailed campaign, or you have a group of people that are really squirrely, you know what I mean? Like they always seem to manage to go off the rails of where you intended to, then it makes it a lot harder. But other than that, I mean, the concept of it is really cool. I really enjoy it. It's pretty straightforward. It's you have two dice pools, and well, this is the way I like to explain it because I think that the book, the way that they do it, is a little confusing. So I'll just tell you the way that we do it in Swordsfall. So it's basically split into two different dice pools. You have two different dice pools, positive and negative dice. Pretty easy. Positive dice are all the parts that you get to add on. Thank you. The positive dice are all the ones that you add in. They're basically your... You should. They're basically, so you have your stats, which is like, let's say your strength, your vigor. You would add that with a skill. Let's say you want to do something like you want to climb the side of a mountain. So you would add your vigor, which has a value from 1 to 5. 5 is the highest. And the easiest way to think of it is 1 is going to be below average, 2 is the average person, and kind of goes up from there. So you have your 5 different parts, which is pretty much right here: agility, vigor, cunning, logic, or determination. And they're meant to be broad. I didn't want to do more attributes than was in the original system. And I didn't necessarily want to take away either, because at some point it becomes a little OP when you can only use 1 or 2 stats to do everything. But you know, they're kind of meant to represent the different parts of you. Agility is obviously things like your ability to move, your flexibility. It's a little bit of speed, a little bit of flexibility. There's room in there to be like, you can be a big guy and be agile. Agile doesn't mean real thin, real lithe. Same thing with vigor. That's why I changed it from strength to vigor, because it's not just about being strong, it's about being like hardy. There's little people that just are full of vigor that are just, ugh. You mean, it's kind of like when people think about like gnomes or dwarves in like meta or stuff like that, which I don't have because I'm not a big fan of it. Then you have cunning, which is basically, it's that weird middle ground between intelligence. It's just that craftiness. It's that ability to be in the middle of a situation and you're like, yes, if I do this and do that, I can do that. It does not necessarily have to be full of words or long-term planning. It's just about that ability to figure that out, you know. Logic is basically intelligence, but I wanted it to be a sense of less straightforward book learning and your ability to piece things together and then relay it. So I feel like when people think of intelligence, they always think of wizards, and I don't think that necessarily is true. You can have that in a rogue, you can have that in a warrior, it's just in a different way. So I wanted people to have the ability to do it narratively, and if you design your character around that, then it's fine. It's not like there's anything in here where there's abilities that are tied to something so intrinsically that you're screwed. And if there is, like, it's just clear warning, so you would basically be trying to build toward that anyway. Then you have aura, which is charisma, your personality. It's that vibe that people get off of you, the vibe that you give, or just even your ability to sort of interplay with that. So, like charisma, but it's a little more broad. And you know, these are all meant to be broad, not to be confusing, but because every once in a while you come across a situation or a character or something that doesn't quite fit like the narrow guidelines. And I feel like in most games, and you would just be like, well, you can't do that, or blah, blah, blah. In this one, like, you can, as long as you and the GM are on the same page, you can kind of come to an agreement as to what that means and to which one to use. And then determination is kind of like it sounds. It's like that deep grinding, your control, your willpower, like your faith, all those combined into under that category. And it's just always about having that flexibility to do different things, but within your same character. So as far as dice, you're going to always have one dice that represents those character stats. So in the climbing the mountain example, you would have the stat of agility, maybe if you were doing something like, let's say you were trying to leap across, from like one cliff to the other. Vigor would be if you were trying to hold on to the side of the cliff, right? Because you're talking about strength, hardiness, that ability to hold on to it. Those would be like your body stats in that equation. I don't really think that's something where you mentally like, I'm going to logic my way out of this mountain. Or, well, it could be something like trying to figure out the weather. You're trying to figure out, are clouds coming in? That might be a logic check, to see your knowledge of weather and patterns, your ability to, figure that out. So there's room in there to be able to pick a stat that goes with what you're body-wise trying to do or mentally. Then you pair that up with a skill. And skills, people are pretty familiar with that with D&D, your classic like swimming and athletics and melee. And a lot of those are in here, but especially with skills, they're more generalized. So there's no swimming. It's all pretty much merged into athletics. And that's just going to be encompassing of across anything that would be athletic. So I'm trying to go for more, I'm going to embrace more of those words that are more encompassing as a whole. Just to make it easier, man, because no one likes having to waste 10, 15 XP on swimming and hope that it matters, or make your character have it because it matters for their backstory. Stuff like that. Like, I don't want people to have to waste experience or waste points on stuff just to feel useful. You should already know how to swim unless you say your character can't swim, and that's fine. Or a situation where you're in a river where an average ability to swim without something athletics would be too dangerous. Like there's logical situations where you would say that someone was skilled in that situation, and that's when a skill comes into play. So I'll have not plenty, but I want to have enough to cover a full gamut of what I think people may need or want to do. And then people can make up ones as they need to along with the GM. Though especially in the alpha test, if people are coming up with ones, I definitely want to know to see if it's something that would be useful to add into the core book or not. So, for those that end up being in the alpha test, definitely let me know. So as far as just doing an action, it's pretty straightforward. You're picking one stat on your body because you're having to do something either mentally or physically. And then if you have a skill that goes with it, if you do not have a skill, it's not that you can't do the roll, you just won't get that bonus dice from it. So it's something that I feel like everybody knows, but I kind of wanted to reinforce that makes sense. And that's something that Genesis does, and I'm going to kind of go through and reemphasize that and tweak some things. But I want you to be that logical. All right, I'm going to jump across the mountain. Cool. I have to have a me stat because it's me. Agility. Boom. Then you would be like, do I have a skill that would make me better at doing this? And something that athletics naturally comes into play. It's not like you're going to have a skill called mountain climbing, because what is mountain climbing? It's just being athletic. So as long as I keep things like that, I feel like it makes a lot of sense as to what that is. So those are your 2 dice. So your amount of points in it will determine how many dice from each one you get. So if you had 3 agility, then that would be 3 dice. If you had 2 athletics, that would be 2 dice. And so this is the only part where it feels like it gets complicated, but it makes sense once you kind of think about it. So you have your skill dice, right, which is associated with your skill, right? So, ish. It's the only part that's kind of weird, but there's really no better way to do it. So your body stat is going to be 3, so you get 3 of the skill dice, which is a D8, right? Your skill enhances that. So because your skill is 2, you get to bump up 2 of those dice to a higher one, so you're going to go from a D8 to a D12. So because you had 3 agility and 2 athletics, you would walk away with 1d8 and 2d12. So it'll be like explained. It makes a lot of sense, but at first when you hear it, it's kind of like, what? Basically, it's just you have a body stat that tells you how many dice you get, and then your skills upgrade that by X amount of dice. And then that would be your roll. And then a lot like D&D, it's then determined by the dice. Did you succeed? Did you fail? But the nice thing about Genesis, and something that I'm just going to enhance and kind of add to a lot, is that it's not just about winning or failing. It's you win and something happens, or you win but something happens, or you fail and something good happens, you fail and something bad happens, or a mix of all three. And so that's where the narrative part comes. So in that situation where, back to the old example of, I want to hop on top of the dragon and I want to wrap the cloak on its face, you would actually be able to just do an agility and athletics roll to basically jump on the dragon to do that action, and then whatever advantages or disadvantages you get would be your thematic extras. So an advantage, you could use an advantage to blind the dragon. You know, the disadvantage might be like, cool, you had succeeded jumping on the dragon, but he swipes you with your tail, and like you're gonna fall off at the end of the turn. Like, it's just stuff like that. It's not meant to negate your success, so it wouldn't be, the disadvantage would not be the dragon knocks you off, because your action was getting on the dragon. It would just be a disadvantage to it. Or it, you know, the dragon has scaly armor, so you take, like, maybe like you have to do a soak test. You know, there's just stuff like that. It's all the thematic parts that normally D&D would either say no to, or another game might say no to. It lets you do it, but in a kind of a codified sort of way. So it's that, and it's really super easy. And the only problem usually is thinking about what those dynamic things are going to be, and what you would do with your advantage or disadvantage. So one of the big things I'm going to be doing in Swordsfall is I'm going to have a pretty long list of general disadvantages that would happen just in general, because there's just some stuff that makes sense. You do this, that bad thing can happen. Not that they're required, but sometimes you just are at that point, you just have no idea, you're just trying to think, and it's a lot easier to maybe look at the list, see something, or even just improvise from that. Same thing with advantages. Though one of the big things in Swordsfall that I'm doing is classes, or as I call them, professions. Right now I'm up to 31 professions, and there'll probably be more. So the whole point is that they each have their own flavor, because in Genesis it's freeform, and I'm not the biggest fan of freeform. I'm like an old school class head, and like I love classes like Ragnarok Online, that sort of thing. I just get really souped up and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna class up. In a sense, it's kind of silly because you're really trading skills for the same skills of higher integer, but it feels more awesome, and I like that feeling. So that's something that I'm really going to embrace, and especially considering that the material itself is pre-colonial Africa, it really gives me a chance to make the different parts of that place feel unique, you know? Because this is a mini grab, I'm not going to name any names, but one of the things I really hate is I feel like anytime I see a game that says that it represents Africa, or is from Africa, or has something like that, it's always instantly tribal. Instantly, always tribal. And it's not that that's necessarily a bad thing, because Africa does have plenty of tribal. It also has plenty of extra stuff. It would be like if every time a game happened in America, it also happened in the bayous of Mississippi. Like, at some point you would be like, that's a ridiculous thing, because there's more to it than that. And it's the same thing in Africa. So I want a lot of these professions to feel like they are kind of almost like a superhero version of what a traditional role would be, in the same way that we've really made knights be mystical or samurais be mystical in RPG. Like, I want to do the same cool ass thing with African stuff, you know. So that's why I came up with stuff like the the Daminga, which is basically mystical Dambe fighters, which, if you haven't seen the article that I posted yet about Dambe, you should. It's super awesome. Let me find this, because I think I already shared it. Yeah, that one. Super good. Which, if you're a Patreon, you actually normally get to read this, but because you showed up on the stream, you get a bonus, because I like you. But this is a real, I call it a martial art. I know some people would object to saying it's a martial art, but it definitely is. It's just hasn't become super popular yet, but it's picking up on YouTube like crazy. And basically, it's literally a concept of like a sword and a shield, with it being like the sword and the shield being your hand. The sword is if you see how there's like his hand is wrapped on his right hand, on actually both of their right hands, that's the sword. So they basically make it almost like a hand club. And their other hand is the shield, and they use that to either block incoming shots with, elbows and whatnot, or with parries. So it's super dope. And they also they're open to kicks and stuff like that. So that's basically your martial class. Any other game would make it generically Kung Fu or Karate, but I don't have to. Instead, I get to pick a fucking sweet ass African martial art, and like those dudes throw hammers. Like you should look it up on YouTube if you're not squeamish, because like they throw hammers. It's hardcore. So I imagine that in the game is just as cool, if not cooler, than a Kung Fu guy. And since it's mystical, I get to do cool stuff like, in the real life martial arts, they have their hands are actually wrapped in rope, so it makes it like a club. But obviously, since I had magic, for them is more or less the closing of the fist makes it like the sword, and like the squaring of the other hand makes it like a shield, and it becomes hard like a shield, sharp like a sword. They also have stuff like liver cakes, which add stuns and stuff like that, which is one of the things that I'm doing a lot. I'm focusing more on trying to make things thematic, so that if you're doing something, it's going to feel more like you have options. So nothing is just straight damage. There's no just this does X damage and that's it. And if it does, it's usually high up on a tree, and that's like your signature hits hard move. Most things are really about how you use it. So there's stuns, there's disables, there is mobilize, things like that. There's also one thing I've been working on a lot is feeling like people have actions, or what I like to kind of think of combos. Because I'm kind of a martial art guy in real life. I'm definitely not a badass, don't get me wrong. Not at all. But I'm a nerd, and I'm a nerd who likes to go hands-on. And one of the things you really learn is that it's never just doing one action. You're never just doing one thing. There's a flow. There's a movement to it. There's moves that you only do after you do something else. There's like openings and transitions. And it's something that I feel like when you try to do in like a super mechanical game like D&D, it kind of weighs it down. And I want it to be a little bit more lightweight than that. I don't want it to be so lightweight to the point where it just feels like you can make up stuff. But I want it to be lightweight enough to where you have room for interpretation, but it still plays within that rules. So I'm going to try to give players more of that ability to kind of do that. Anyways, to improve, enhance playing as a physical class is a bonus. And then so that's one of the big things like I want to do. So one of the things I'm going to work on, I'm not ready to show it yet. I'm kind of in the middle of it. But classes like the Dominga will have sort of a combo system where they have like openers, transitions, and then finishers. So the finishers will do more damage, obviously, but they have to be led up to it. And then so that way I can give you stuff that gives you a little more damage, but they're also thematical. So the openers will have a lot of movement, a lot of maneuvers, things that are useful. So I'm just trying to eliminate any need to feel like you have to load up and blast one move, because it's not necessarily about attrition in this game, which is a thing. We'll see if that works. I'm taking out some of the Genesis has a lot of ways to heal. Like anytime you get like 2 or 3 advantages, you can basically heal. Not a huge fan of that. Oh, what's up, man? I meant to put out another one saying that I was actually on, and then by the time I get everything set up, I was like, let me just get started. But next time, I'm usually on a schedule. I'm gonna start getting back to a schedule, and like Mondays and Tuesdays, I'll do earlier for like the GMT, because usually I'm at night. So what was that? But yeah, so like openers, transitioners, and like it's not gonna be anything you bog down. I don't want it to be anything to where it feels like if you don't hit the finisher, then your damage is weak. It should just feel like the progression of a fight, so that if you get to that point to where you are fighting a rival or a nemesis, like a bigger type enemy, that it feels like something pays off. But in an average situation, like your openers and just regular attacks and working together with like players should be more than enough for any combat situations. But the game is way more than just combat, and one of the things that me personally, I've always been like a big RPer, like in the sense that I love making a character and having them actually have a motivation, something they're going to. Like I want a character to feel like by the time we move on to a new game, like he got stuff, he accomplished stuff. It wasn't just a bag full of items. It was also like, yeah, he saved that person and he got some land and he got this thing. And a lot of that should come through social just as much as through combat. And social should be more than just talking to the GM and having the GM handling some stuff. So there's going to be, basically I'm taking the same rules for a combat encounter and making it toward a social encounter. Yeah, I'm not going to show the screen because I don't want you guys to see the behind the scenes, but I will read to you what some of this is. One of the things that you do when you make your character in Swordsfall is you have to pick a motivation. And it's something that's in Genesis, but it's something that I'm making part of your actual character progression, your character soul, in a sense. Because it's more, like I said, more than just gathering stats, more than just that. It's not a loot grind. The loot's different. It's going to be more about enhancements. So it's more like you do something, you're considered heroic, you now have heroic enhancement. So it's that sort of... That's a plot spoiler, I can't talk about that one. Think about it in terms of why do we think items like Excalibur is powerful? Once upon a time it was a sword, and then someone great held it and did a lot of awesome stuff. And now it's something. So, in the game, your motivations also play into something bigger. So, you start off having to pick between, well, not between, you actually have to pick one of each. So, you have to pick a desire, a fear, a strength, and a flaw. And one of the things you work toward in the game is completing your motivations. As you complete your get more motivations, you will get some sort of thing. I haven't given a name yet. I don't want to say it out loud in case I change the name and then you're like, what was that? But it's going to add up to basically think of experience, but a different kind of pool. And that's going to have an effect. So for that, in social encounters, you also get to interact with other people in a sense of not so much, you don't have to take turns. If people want to decide to take turns because you have 2 players that are engaged in one NPC, then you're going to use the same initiative rules that are in combat. And that way it's just simple. But instead what you're basically doing is you're wearing down the opponent mentally if it's combative. So you basically have like negotiations, or let's see, I'm just going to read it to you because I'm not going to read it on top of my head. Yeah, so right now we have conversations and interrogations. So think of conversations as being friendly. You know, you're not trying to manipulate them or anything like that negatively. You're not trying to wear them down. You're trying to win them over. And then you have interrogations, which is sort of more combat, where you're doing conversation combat moves that wear down their strain, which is the mental. So you have like kind of like think of wounds as HP, and think of strain as your not MP because it's not mana, but like your mental power. And in an interrogation, you're basically trying to wear them down and bring their strain down until basically they've capitulated. So the social classes will have almost the fighting version of that. They'll have stuff that's plus strain, so it'll be like stern arguments, stuff like that. And then obviously in the advantages and disadvantages you can play into that, but that's sort of a thing. So yeah. And that's basically what interrogation is, and it's also themed that way. It's clear that the way the direction the social encounter is going is different. Like a conversation should ideally lead to a positive connection. A negotiation may lead to a connection, but is probably going to lead to more like information. And connections is something that is also, think of it like almost like a resource, because definitely one of the things that you see a lot in like African lore is how much it matters about your neighbors, how much it matters about your friends, your family. Like you can't just go it alone. You cannot go it alone. Like the lone wolf is a dead wolf. Like you see that repeatedly. Like even the loneliest of wolves still plays nice with the tribe. So connections matter. So if you're trying to make a connection, you want to have a conversation. If you don't really care about the connection and you need information, you have interrogation. So I like the idea of an interrogation being a combat counter based on social skills. In my D&D game, my players are pretty much useless at interrogation. They either ask and give up or resort to violence without offering an ultimatum. Yeah, I went through a game one time where I thought they were going to try to have a friendly negotiation. Boy, afterwards I was kind of like, I think some of you need some therapy. That was a little disturbing. But yeah, I'm always trying to come up with like more of a way to do it without a super lot of crunch. Well, think about it like this, because there's really only two different pools. You only have wound and strains. Wound is your body stat. Strain is basically a resource that you also spend in battle anyway. It's your your mental stat. Once you run out of strain, you pass out. So it's really only meant to be there so that in the same way that we have crunch for combat because we have to determine who wins and who loses, social situations are the same way. Like if you're thinking about two politicians, that's very much a combat situation. There's rules, there's moves, there's an outcome, there's a bar. It's really no different. And often the stakes are just as high, and I feel like we just devalue that. So it adds crunch, but it's the same crunch. You're not having to learn any new extra set of rules. It's the same concept, except you're not punching them with their fist, you punch them with their words. And we know that's very effective. We know that there's nothing like getting hit with a salty argument and you're just like, oh, I'll just go home now and kill myself. So yeah, and it's really up to the DM, and it's one of those things where, and I especially write it in the book, that you should only be rolling when the stakes require it to be. If nothing is at that stake, don't make your players roll for it. Roll when something's on the line. And even this should be the same way. You should roll when it's on the line and not just because you just want to mess with the players. And I always feel that some of that has more to do with the GM's feeling they don't have tools at their disposal at the time, rather than necessarily anybody's fault. Because I definitely know I've been in a situation as a DM where players think they're in a meaningful conversation, and to me it literally means nothing, and I want to move on. And I'm trying to give people a railway to do those things in a way that makes sense for everyone. And then if people end up being good and don't need it, then cool. Do whatever. but it's good to have something to fall back on. And that's, I want, and I'll make sure it's highlighted like that. I want some things to feel more like a safety net rather than a tool to beat the players, because you should have fun. At the end of the day, the tabletop game is really about a bunch of people hanging out and interacting together over a story. And I'm just trying to give people a different story and a different way to interact, but it should still be fun, But for me particularly, I can just say that as a player, I've been in situations where I wanted to almost have an HP bar, because I'm like, I have these social skills, I want to be able to do something with it, and sometimes it's too open to interpretation. So, nothing to bog it down or anything like that, but just having those tools at hand so that when it needs to, so that when someone has that conversation that they're like, hey, this matters, that cool, here's your fight bar, more or less. And also, like, I feel like it could also make some people be more involved, because I feel like since a lot of people are combat minded and that's what they're used to, it's a lot easier to be like, oh, I know how to interact with this, like, negotiation. I have, like, aura, and I can use that in combat. And I can use intimidation. Yeah, okay. Like, and sometimes you just had to get them in from that. So. And, like, it's not... And this is definitely a game where it's, not necessarily social focused, but I want to de-murder hobo for the sake of being murder hobo. You can be, if you really want to, but I want to have enough other cool stuff to where it feels like it's worthwhile interacting with the world and the environment, and especially having, like, it's worthwhile to work with your teammates. One of the things I kind of liked about Blades in the Dark was that it really felt like they were giving your players reasons to work together. And I feel like that's something that definitely gets underrated. Like, the game always gives people a reason to do something, and maybe a little bit of player agency, but not a lot of reasons to have team cohesion. And that's what really makes it fun. If you just have 4 people versus a GM trying to do whatever, I think anybody who's tabletop long enough, I think we've all been there once or twice, and that's not fun. But when it feels like it's a room full of people having a party and the GM is just a person describing what's happening and everybody's kind of in on it together, like, that's where the magic's at. And sometimes it's hard for some people to get there naturally. I feel like I've just GM'd enough where I can be like, I can at least write it down. If you don't need it, skip over it. Fuck it. And that's another big thing too, is trying to lay out to where all of the useful information will be toward the front. So you'll start off with, like, an instant little layover of the game, and then straight into dice rolls and straight into character creation and all that good stuff. So there's plenty of lore, and all the lore will be toward the middle of the book, like in between that, the player's part and the GM part. So just trying to make it easier for people, because I've tried so hard to get people into some good games, and just the book layout made it hard. And I'm the kind of person, I don't really care. I'll deal with it, but not everybody can. And I want people to play my fucking game. Okay. Yeah, I think it went public today, so I think I can show you this. I made a nice little, handy little, diagram for what initially was what I thought was going to be all the classes for Swordsfall, and it being just the first ones, because I decided I wanted more. Well, not so much I decided I wanted more, but as I was spitballing, I realized there was things that I could fill in, gaps that I wanted filled with. Yeah, I was on that post. I was talking about that. Yeah, absolutely. Like, a lot of games don't respect GM's time, and that's because a lot of games are designed by super GMs, and that was one thing I wanted to highlight. I don't think it's malicious, because it's a lot of fucking work to build a game. You don't do that and then just hope that people just don't play that bitch. At least I would hope not. Like, but I think it's just because the same kind of people who would sit down and make a game are the same kind of super GMs who just would never be stopped. They're willing to sit down and spend the day or two on their day off to write a campaign and write stuff up. And unfortunately, that's not everybody. I think they kind of forget that when they write their game because they're so into it that that's what they would do. So obviously, someone who loves it would do the same thing. Yeah. So these are the beginning classes. There's actually 3 missing, 4 missing. So I moved kind of fast. And basically how it works is, technically in Swordsfall everything is magic, so everything is a magic system and also not a magic system. So you'll see I rarely say magic system because it's not like it's separate. It's called Hakan, but lore-wise everybody can have access to Hakan because everything is connected through nature, through life, through ether, and they all have that little bit of magic in them. It's really about the ability to utilize that correctly and really make it something. And that's what a profession is. It's basically saying that you've taken something natural and you've really skilled yourself at it, which is basically what a profession is. And so those 3 branches are basically divination, possession, and invocation. And divination is, if anybody's familiar with divination, it's pretty much as it sounds. If not, think of it as that's what your fortune tellers, your oracles in a sense, are doing. Divination is basically peeking into a spirit force or into the gods to be able to learn something, to divine something. Then you have possession, which is pretty much what it sounds like. It's literally spirit possession. And one of the things that I've noticed and was pointed out by a friend of mine is how, especially in Western media, possession is really vilified and not ever talked about in the way that it's done in other worlds. So I wanted to show possession in a positive realm, and like the realm that it was really done in like pre-colonial Africa, because it's super interesting. And the last one is invocation, and invocation is literally using that divine power, that ether, to invoke, to use. So people who are actively using that power for themselves is an invoker, and that's like what people consider casters. There's not like a lot of spell casting because there's other stuff to do, but like your enhanced, your fighters, like the Dominga, that's an invoker. They're using that power for themselves. And so yeah, all the classes branch out from one of those 3 parts. Let's see. I think my favorite games to run have a section chapter that's called How to GM. That explain the basic obvious stuff, but also highlight what's different about the system. Yep. Essentially giving the GM who has half a day to prepare to play everything they need to get up and going. Yeah. And that's one thing that my GM section is going to be pretty robust. Honestly, I'm gonna start it off and just be like, the first part's gonna be like, I'm gonna talk to you as if you've never played a tabletop game before, because we do have a whole new generation of people who aren't really familiar, or if they are, it's just D&D, or or someone's homebrew. I'm always surprised at how many people have their own little mini homebrew between a couple of friends that are full games. So just like the basic stuff, and stuff you see in every book, but, just you gotta talk about it. Also, one of the things we're doing in my book, and I actually mentioned that in Respecting GM's Time, is I have a system I'm working on that's called Scenes. And it's nothing super crazy or special, but basically what it is, it's a whole section in a GM book, so that, let's say you plan your whole day for the crew to leave town A and go to town B, except the player group decide that they want to detour into the forest because reasons. You didn't plan for a forest trip at all. You planned for a city trip. Normally, you either have 2 choices. You either just tell them no, tell the kids no, or you let them do whatever and you toss out an encounter that you had planned for 2-3 days. So what I want to do is I want to try to, like they said, respect the GM's time and make up the middle. So scenes is like, so let's say they want to go to the forest. Well, you can flip to the scenes part where it says like, and it'll be like an overarching group. So it'll be like forest, woods, X thing at clearings, and it'll have a list of names of forests in like the different regions, which is pretty easy because forests are only in like Garuda mainly and Hawklore and stuff like that. And it'll have like suggested beasts or like animals that'll be there, and I even want to put like the little short stat blocks if I have enough room on the pages. And then it'll have like NPCs, suggested NPCs with like little stat blocks for them and like little tidbits, so that basically you can go through these little tables and little blocks and quickly like come up with something to shepherd the kids along to get them back to where you want to. That way you don't have to just dump everything you did in favor of, what they were doing. So, and that's kind of one of the things that I'm trying to add to make it easier on players and easier on GMs, because as a player it's a lot easier when your GM isn't flipping out because I didn't plan for this shit. What was your, whatever again? What do I make the DC for this? And that's the thing too, you don't have to worry about. I'm going to make it a lot easier to stat out enemies because I've always hated having to make enemies on the fly in something like D&D. I had like 2-3 pages where I had like common monsters and stuff written out already with like stat blocks so that I could do that, because on the fly is just and then you just end up having to hand wave it and nobody has fun. Let's see, should I talk about some more classes? We're not going to do a super long one today. I just kind of wanted to get the game in people's ears and kind of let them know what's going on behind the scenes, because it's hard being vocal and also developing at the same time, because you kind of have to go to your cave. But then I'm like, I don't want people to think I'm just fucking off, especially considering I have a Patreon, so I always feel like I really, really want people to know that I'm working hard and that they're gonna have something super cool to play. I'm weird like that. Let's see. Yeah, so I know that graphics aren't the biggest, but class-wise, they kind of range. So should I go through all of them? We'll go through all of them real quick. So I'm really focusing on each profession feeling like the name, like a profession. So I want it to feel like it's something that you train to do, something that's like a purpose, like it would be your, not life work, but it's like a profession. Like people ask you, what do you do? That matters. And it definitely matters in pre-colonial Africa. So the professions kind of mimic that and also gamey sort of way. So in Deviant Nation, we have like the Amatola, and they're war diviners, which divining normally is very mild. Normally divining is really about a connection and information. Like when you're trying to understand what's happening in the world and what happened with your luck or why this happened, you go to a diviner. And different diviners have different skills in different areas, and they're very specialized, so if you have super bad luck, like no matter where you go, like things are breaking, it just feels like you're cursed, you would go to someone who specializes in trying to understand curses, because it's something that it's not like they'll just look at you and know. They have to be able to read the signs and have the right connections and stuff like that. So a war diviner, Amatola, is someone who specifically, think of them almost as like a war chanter, except they're not doing that at the time. Basically, they bless armies, they bless kings, and they're the ones that make sure that like when an arrow would strike you, it just kind of glances off. It's very specific, so they very much help you in times of battle. So you usually see them like attached to kings and dignitaries. They're very worshipped in that sense of like when things are going bad, that's who you want on your side. And then like you have just a general diviner, And then like each of those groups, the divination, possession, invocation, they each basically have just a general catch-all sort of profession, you know, because you always just have the general practitioner. Like you may have the artist who specializes in oil painting or clay painting, and you just sometimes you just have just the artists who they're kind of jack of all trades. They don't specialize in any one thing. They just kind of, you know, they get the whole overall picture, or maybe they're the scholars, and that's what a diviner is. So for people who don't necessarily like any of the flavor, the different divinations, you can always be a diviner. And then within the scope of the game and your GM, you can always work on your own individual flavor. But the diviner will have its own flavor. It's just going to be very more broad. Ember paths are pretty much exclusive to the desert to Vinyana, to a culture called the Drakan. And they're diviners who basically are able to wake up the dragon blood that is within the Drakan. And it's not so much that it's dramatic as making them into dragons or half dragons or anything like that. It does give them what they call Mark of Ryujin, which is their dragon god. And it's like little things, like a little bit of scale. Like maybe some of them have like a little bit of like little tip of a horn. It's very subtle. But it also allows them to basically be almost like empaths. And I'm still working on them, but they're going to be more of a mind power in a very trippy sort of way. There's a couple of classes that are kind of exclusive to certain kind of stuff, which I don't have a problem doing because I feel like by the end of it, there's going to be enough professions to where like the exclusive ones will have enough lore flavor to where it'll be more exciting than being like, oh, why do they get that? Griots are basically kind of like your African bard in an interesting sort of way. They very much are about reciting their talents in songs and whatnot, and it's super cool. There's a couple different flavors because like the as I just have a massive brain fart, the Karoo, their griots are more about, they're almost more like magicians. They do a lot of drums and things like that. But basically, they have the ability to remember events and to replay them, but they do so always in a musical way, which is a real African thing that I'm just taking and kind of making a little more fantastical. But they're super interesting. I'll probably be doing a behind the keyboard about them soon, because some of the stuff I've read about them, I read a guy who actually surmised that he thinks that the modern concept of the bard actually came from the African griot and not from the troubadour or the Western bard, which is just delicious to me, and I can't help but laugh. Let's see, let me skip through some of these. The Sanu is your doctor, though he specializes more in potions, salves, that sort of thing, and that kind of just mimics more of the medicine that was more traditional Africa. It was really more about that knowledge of nature and spirits and being able to mix that together. Let's see. The Mabar are cool, which I don't think they're on. Yeah, they're not on that. So the Mabar are a divination, and they're basically, think of they're wrestlers with war chants, and they're based off of it's like a Sinhalese type wrestling called Lamb, and that's one of they're kind of like Dambe. They've been picking up lately thanks to YouTube. There was a little documentary, Fight World, on Netflix, which has an episode on it. I recommend it. It's super interesting. If you want to see some giant yoked black dudes, like, I mean, like, boom. I'm like, whew. So, but one of the things about the sport as well is they always have the deviation side, and it's really about getting the crowd into it. So, like, they pump themselves up with the crowd, and as a sport, the concept is that you get power from the crowd as well. That, like, they hype you up, they protect you, they give you power. So I'm taking that and making it more like war chants. So they're wrestler Zangief style almost, with like suplexes and pins, but they also have war chants where I'm thinking I'm gonna have a mix. Like some of the war chants gonna be about hyping them up, and some of them's gonna be about hyping up the party. Cause I don't know, and I also love combining stuff. I know people are probably just gonna use it for the stats, but thematically, in my mind, there's something hilarious about this giant, hulking, 6 foot, 300-pound black dude just jumping up Zangief style, suplexing the dude, and just getting up and be like, "Rah!" And the party's like, "Yeah!" So, I want to have that sort of thematic in there. So, in the game, it'll be something like, after they do this slam, then you get to insta-do maybe this buff thing, and just stuff like that, so that it feels like there's a cohesion and you're flowing and you're moving and stuff like that. Really, I just wanted a black Zangief in my life. The Whirlwind. We have Celestial Shields, which anybody who's read anything on Swordsfall knows Celestial Shields. They've been around for a while, and they're always like a classic fun one for me. They're like my favorite thing that I've made up. Well, no, there's a lot of things I like, but there's something classic about it because their big thing is they are protectors, but they're also like almost scholars because they grow up in these temples and they learn how to fight, but they also learn about politics of the world and world history, and they're really meant to be people who can go out into the world by themselves and help other people because they've been like well-rounded. And so the Celestial Shield part is because they all have these magical shields called Star Shields, and a Star Shield can change into any type of shield they want to at any moment's notice. So they can go from like a small dinner plate shield to like a full tower shield, and they can do that reflexively. And because they've been trained in different shield styles, they can actually use those as a shield style. So it's almost like style switching, but based on the shield. And they also have like a whole bunch of different invocations because they're kind of half caster, but not caster. They're like melee casting almost. So they can do weird stuff like they can slow down time for themselves, which just means they get like extra perception. They have like a protective bubble that they can put on people, and they do that through invoking their Pangul gods. So they have like a little bit of a clerical paladin vibe to them, but they're not paladins because the way people do paladins really gets annoying. Because honestly, let's be real. If your whole point is that you're devoted to a god, that doesn't make you more pious. That means that you have a lot more latitude to do whatever you want because your god said that was cool. But I won't get onto that one. Then we have like Corsairs, which is basically your pirates. Which, did you know there was a bunch of black pirates? Did you know that Blackbeard was probably a black dude, which is why they call him Blackbeard? So that's a whole thing. Which you'll see that more and more as I that'll be in the game at first, but I'm definitely gonna get more into the sea stuff when I get into like Grimnest and Nubaya and some of those people. And then Deninga, which is what I mentioned earlier. They're the ones based on that Dambe style, which is like the sword and the shield. And I kind of made them as like a cool kung fu style class that people think of, but like actually based on this real martial art, because it still encompasses a movement. There's a lot of getting in, getting out. So right now I have a lot of stuff like they do kicks that stun people, and like whenever someone tries to attack them and they miss, then they get a bonus on their next hit because they're fighters. So I like to imagine that at least someone who gets into the mind of a fighter can understand like the concept of being like, oh yeah, like when you're getting a fight and someone misses you and like you get a free shot, and I want that to feel thematic because it's narrative. So there's a lot of stuff that you do that's really about your position, but it's not game related, it's just thematic. And then we have like some crafting classes, of course, and one of the things I wanted to do, because I've seen this go around a lot on Twitter, is about what crafting is. As sometimes crafting for some people is fun, and for other people it means waiting for 3 hours while they do a shopping list. And I feel that one. So this is going to be less about shopping and more about experience. Because Forge Whispering is based on basically the concept I had when I watched a documentary on Damascus steel, and basically they were talking about how they think that it's more about that Damascus steel was made from a certain kind of ore. Not that it was uncommon, it was just that the minerals that it had was just unique to the region, and that the way that they crafted it was made for that ore, and thus that's how you got this really sweet, hard, sword. And it was really just someone taking the best materials they had and figuring out really how to make it work. Forge Whisper is the same way, except there's a little magic element of being able to whisper magic to make all the ions line up to make something super sharp. So they don't really have to spend time buying ingredients because they're really enhancing what's already there. So like in-game ones are going to be more like about doing weapon buffs, stuff like that. There's a whole thing with enhancements, but I'm not ready to talk about that yet. That one's going to be complicated. Let's see. Ooh, then we have the Minos, which they're super cool because, and another, did you know, there are real Amazonians and they were black women. Basically, they're from the ancient Benin, and they called them Amazons. And that's just because like a whole bunch of Westerners came over and they're like, oh shit, like women in the military and they're badass, they must be Amazons, like this myth I've heard. And the Benin were like, no, we just have badass women in our military. Sorry. But so I have the Minos in there, and all women army, not just like a force, it's a fat, huge army. They really specialize in ranged, so they're quick snipers almost, And like, I hadn't thought about it, but someone was like, oh, it sounds like Trucker from Overwatch, and I was like, I didn't even think about that. I barely play that game. But it's cool. They're like almost like musketeers, but they have this whole hard edge where like they don't feel pain because it's been trained out of them. And this is like the real life ones. Like they would scale walls that were covered in thorns and just give no Fs. And like they would talk about how like their precision with these muskets were badass, but if they didn't get you in one shot, then they would rush across the battlefield and decapitate people and finish them off. Like they scared the pants off some dudes. So that's kind of what these are, though they're more disciplined than that. They're not just like some of the books make them sound like they're savages, and you read who wrote them, and it's less surprising. But like they're like what you would think of as like your hardcore SEAL team, except instead of this team, it's an army. I think it's cool that way anyway. Shadow Tales, which I've been floating around that article for a while. They're my black ninjas, though they're more like they have the ability to connect to the shadow realm that lets them teleport through people's shadows and through their own shadow and control from shadow powers. That'll be fun. Spellbinders. Spellbinders, what they do is they basically bind objects and spells. So they're capable of making magical equipment temporarily, things like that, talismans, things like that. So the kind of crafting class, kind of not crafting class, because I don't want anybody just to sit down and spend time crafting. So something I'll be working on as we go through. And then in Possession, we have like the Atoners, and they're basically spirit bounty hunters. They're not exclusive to Grimnest, but they're a Grimnest flavored class, which Grimnest is in the west side of the world, and they're more free-for-all. They don't really have like an overall government. That's where like the pirates are, there's land raiders. It's not so much free-for-all, but it definitely is, there's no organized law. It's about where you are and who's in control. And Atoners are basically people who have gotten contracts from spirits, basically people who have died and have wallowed, and their goal is to go and atone. So basically, they're your bounty hunters. They show up and they're like, "Oh, you killed this family, and we found out." So that kind of stuff. Blight hounds are, how do I describe them? They're kind of like Inquisition hunters, except they're hunting for those that are infected with what's called Xavier's touch, which is basically infection slash curse that over time eats away at someone's soul and turns them into a demon, or really makes them open to be possessed by an awful demon, and then eats their soul and they never come back. And so Blighthounds are the ones who, without anybody asking to, and often at the behest of people, take it upon themselves to go and hunt down these people for what they think is the better good. And is there room to move from one class into another? Yes. Though, think about it more like you're going from one profession to the other. So you really can't do both at the same time. And it's definitely going to cost extra to go into your off profession. So think about it more like you would be able to either go fully into one profession or part way into two. But you wouldn't have enough to be badass in two. So, trying to give people that option, but I also don't want people cross-classing just for uber benefits and to make super characters. I'm sure there's room for the GM to into a toner. Well, basically, you would game-wise, you would start off as what a profession you wanted, if that's what you're asking. So you would start out to a toner, but like, let's say you were let's say you were a celestial shield and you wanted to become an atoner. Game wise, I'm gonna let you have the ability to it, but like it's going to be less efficient than one or the other. But I don't necessarily want to just tell people no. Like if they want to do it story wise or something like that, yeah. But definitely, it's something that you apply yourself to, so it's kind of hard to be a profession at two things. Yeah. But there will be that option. Let's see, what else do we have? Then we have like the Le Mans, and the Le Mans are kind of like historians, except so basically what they do is they channel old gods, because they specialize in possession. So basically they channel the spirits of old gods and corporeal gods, and they attain this knowledge, and they are usually attached to, like I said, like one of those like kings, noblemen, because they are the ones who know everything. But they don't necessarily share their knowledge just with anybody. They have their own individual game going on, usually at the behest of a god themselves. I also want to give them the ability to sort of do damage with knowledge. So rather than attack with like their own melee or range or something like that, I'm working on a way for them to do damage and knowledge, almost like a social. Thanks for coming by, Dark Dragon. Appreciate it, man. And you'll definitely be seeing more as I get closer to doing an alpha test here soon, within the next few weeks. So I just kind of like, yeah. And then there's just like Masquerader, which is basically they have masks that let them change into different things or gain different powers. Soul Carvers are magical wood carvers that can even do things like infuse souls into carvings. Spirit Investigators are, think of them like spirit detectives, Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu Yu Hakusho, I should say. Kind of almost sort of a vein, but in African it was really more like they were really in tune to listening to spirits, and they could like focus in on things. So definitely they're like the ones who someone gets wrongfully murdered. They're the ones who are able to sort of track down and with the spirits guide down what happened. And then one of the ones that I just started making up yesterday, and that's not on that list, is an animalist. And literally what they can do is they use monster souls for powers. So I'm just nicknaming it beast equips, but they can like beast equip a different soul from a different monster or beast and gain their powers and kind of merge into them shapeshift-ish. So yeah, there's a lot of cool classes. They're all a lot different. I'm doing something pretty different from what I've seen a lot of lately. And I hope it kind of resonates with people, and I hope it doesn't like freak them out. But I've just always had the urge to do something cool that's just never really been shown as far as I know, you know? And there's just so much of it. Alright, I think hour 20, man. I think we're gonna kind of come to a wrap, so I'll show you guys what I'm working on right now. In between that and the game, this is like the latest one I'm working on, as I'm kind of slowly filling in more of like the hierarchy of like the Garuda royalty and whatnot. But Zincora Villa is literally the capital, so it's kind of important for people to know about that. So look forward to that one soon. I'm kind of toying away with this one in between the RPG, but the RPG just takes so much time. There's so much work. I mean, I knew how much work it was going to be, but even then, like, it's one thing, it's down to, I'm like scrolling through the Scrivener, I'm just like, scroll. There's also going to be a whole system where when your character dies, they become an ancestral spirit. That's a thing. So, yeah, we'll talk about that more later. That's like my super secret sauce. I like the idea of people having things to do after their character is gone. Or maybe even a reason for their character to retire. So yeah. Alright. I appreciate everybody for coming by. Subscribe, like if you haven't already. Check me out on Patreon. I believe the bot has been shouting that out quite a bit. You don't have to donate. Even $1 is cool. But really, man, I'm just trying to have it one way for people to be able to come in and view stuff. So, alright, guys, I appreciate it. I'll probably start doing more of these more often. I've been slacking lately and also been writing. But I'll probably do like 1 or 2 of these a week and just kind of show what's going on because things are getting pretty far. I have an internal alpha that's about to start up in probably the next week or 2. And it'll help me hammer down like some of the finer details. So, alright, peeps. Deuces.